Dog won't leave tree stump. Owner finally digs and finds this. Evelyn Palmer, a woman who carried her 78 years with the grace of a seasoned oak, resided in the quaint New England town of Havenwood, Massachusetts. Her home, a charming two-story colonial with weathered clapboard siding and a welcoming front porch, was a testament to a life well lived. A life steeped in the traditions and rhythms of small-town America. Evelyn was a retired librarian, a profession that had perfectly suited her meticulous nature, her love of order, and her insatiable curiosity. She was a woman of routines, of carefully cultivated habits that provided structure and comfort in her solitary life. Her days began with the rising sun and a cup of strong black coffee, enjoyed on the porch swing, weather permitting. She would then tend to her small but vibrant flower garden, a riot of colorful blooms that spilled out onto the meticulously manicured lawn. She was an active member of the Havenwood community, attending weekly bridge club meetings, volunteering at the local library, and participating in the lively discussions at the town's historical society. She wasn't one for idle gossip or frivolous pursuits. She preferred the company of books, the quiet contemplation of nature, and the stimulating exchange of ideas. Her constant companion, her shadow, was a spirited Jack Russell Terrier named Sparky. He was a whirlwind of energy, a compact bundle of muscle and mischief, with a bright white coat, a murky brown patch over one eye, and a tail that wagged with perpetual enthusiasm. Sparky was a stark contrast to Evelyn's calm demeanor, a vibrant splash of chaos in her otherwise orderly life. She'd adopted him from a local rescue shelter 5 years earlier, a decision she'd made on a whim, a sudden impulse to inject some youthful exuberance into her quiet existence. And Sparky had certainly delivered. He was a demanding dog, requiring long walks, vigorous games of fetch, and constant attention. But he was also fiercely loyal, incredibly affectionate, and possessed an uncanny ability to sense Evelyn's moods, offering a comforting nudge or a playful lick whenever she seemed down. He was her alarm clock, her exercise buddy, her confidant, and her most reliable source of entertainment. Their home sat on a generous plot of land, a legacy from Evelyn's late husband, Arthur. They had bought the property together, a young couple with dreams of building a life filled with family, laughter, and the quiet joys of small-town living. They'd raised their 2 children there, seen them off to college, and welcomed grandchildren with open arms. The defining feature of their backyard had been a magnificent maple tree, its towering branches providing shade in the summer and a blaze of fiery color in the autumn. It had been their tree, a symbol of their shared life, their rootedness in the community. Evelyn and Arthur had planted it together. Not out of some deep romantic, it is more a start point of their new life. But age and a particularly brutal winter storm had taken their toll. The tree had become diseased, its core rotting from the inside out. Evelyn had reluctantly hired a tree service to remove it, a painful decision that left a gaping hole in the landscape and a rike in her heart. All that remained was a large, stubborn stump, a stark reminder of what had been lost. Sparky's unsettling obsession began almost immediately after the tree was removed. It started subtly, with him sniffing around the stump, circling it cautiously, his nose twitching. Evelyn initially dismissed it as curiosity, the natural instinct of a dog exploring a new element in his environment. But the behavior didn't stop. It intensified. Sparky became fixated on the stump, spending hours each day sitting beside it, staring at it, pawing at it, sometimes letting out a low, frustrated whine. He would dig at the edges of the stump, sending splinters of wood and clumps of dirt flying. He would bark at it, a sharp, insistent bark that was completely out of character for him. Evelyn tried everything she could think of to distract him. She called his name, offering his favorite squeaky toys, tossing his beloved tennis ball. He would briefly acknowledge her, his tail wagging half-heartedly, but then he would immediately return to the stump, his attention completely consumed. She tried scolding him, using a firm "No, Sparky," but he would simply look at her with his big, brown eyes, a mixture of confusion and determination in their depths. It was as if he were trying to tell her something important, something she couldn't understand. The weather turned colder, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. The first frost dusted the lawn with a shimmering coat of white. Yet, Sparky remained steadfast in his vigil, refusing to leave the stump, even when the cold wind whipped through the yard. Evelyn started to worry. This wasn't just curiosity. This was something more. This was an obsession, a compulsion, a behavior that defied all logical explanation. And it was starting to take a toll on Sparky. He was losing weight, his usual boundless energy replaced by a weary lethargy. He was still affectionate, still eager for his walks, but his heart wasn't in it. His heart, it seemed, was with the Stump. Evelyn felt a growing sense of unease, a prickling of anxiety that she couldn't shake. She was a woman of reason, of logic, of practicality. She didn't believe in ghosts, or premonitions, or any sort of supernatural phenomena. But Sparky's behavior was so strange, so persistent, so utterly inexplicable, that she was starting to question her own convictions. Something was drawing him to that Stump, something powerful, something she couldn't see, couldn't understand. And she was determined to find out what it was. Evelyn's initial attempts to curb Sparky's Stump-centric behavior were rooted in practicality. She tried, with increasing levels of creativity and desperation, to make the Stump less appealing, less accessible. She scattered mothballs around the base, hoping the pungent odor would deter him, a suggestion she'd found on an online dog forum. Sparky, however, merely sniffed at the mothballs with disdain and resumed his post. She tried covering the Stump with a heavy tarp, securing it with bricks and rocks. Sparky, with the tenacity of a terrier, dug underneath the tarp, wriggling his way back to his beloved or perhaps be-hated wooden adversary. He emerged, covered in dirt, and looking rather pleased with himself. She even attempted a more direct approach, physically blocking his access to the Stump with a makeshift barricade of lawn furniture and potted plants. This resulted in a comical, yet frustrating, game of canine obstacle course, with Sparky finding increasingly inventive ways to circumvent her defenses. He squeezed through gaps, jumped over obstacles, and even, on one memorable occasion, tunneled under a particularly large geranium pot. Evelyn sighed, watching him from the kitchen window, a mug of lukewarm tea in her hand. "You are one stubborn dog, Sparky," she muttered, a mixture of exasperation and affection in her voice. Her next logical step was a visit to Dr. Miller, the local veterinarian, a man whose calm demeanor and practical approach to animal care had always reassured her. The waiting room was filled with the usual cacophony of barks, meows, and the anxious whispers of pet owners. Evelyn sat patiently, Sparky unusually subdued at her feet, his gaze fixed on the linoleum floor. When their turn came, Evelyn described Sparky's obsessive behavior, detailing his relentless digging, barking, and refusal to leave the Stump, even in adverse weather. Dr. Miller listened attentively, his brow furrowed in concentration. He examined Sparky thoroughly, checking his eyes, ears, teeth, and reflexes. He palpated his abdomen, feeling for any signs of tenderness or swelling. He even took a blood sample, just to be sure. "Well, Evelyn," Dr. Miller said, after completing his examination, physically, "Sparky is in excellent shape. His blood work is completely normal. There's no sign of any infection, injury, or neurological problem that would explain this behavior." Evelyn felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by a surge of frustration. "But then why is he doing this, Doctor? He's never acted like this before." Dr. Miller leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes, dogs develop obsessive behaviors due to stress, anxiety, or even boredom. Has anything changed in his routine recently? Any new people, new animals, new environments?" Evelyn shook her head. "Nothing I can think of. My life is pretty predictable, and Sparky's routine hasn't changed at all. Except for this Stump obsession." Dr. Miller considered this for a moment. "It's possible he's smelling something we can't. Dogs have an incredibly sensitive sense of smell, far beyond our own. Maybe there's an animal burrowing underneath the Stump, or some sort of residue from the tree itself that's attracting him." He paused, then added, "We could try some anti-anxiety medication, just to see if it helps. But honestly, Evelyn, I think this might be one of those cases where we just have to wait and see. It might be a phase, something he'll eventually grow out of." Evelyn left the vet's office feeling more discouraged than ever. The anti-anxiety medication had no effect. Sparky remained as fixated on the Stump as ever, his behavior unchanged. She started to confide in her neighbors, hoping for some insight, some explanation, some glimmer of hope. She spoke to Mrs. Gable, the woman next door, who, as always, had a ready supply of opinions and anecdotes. "It's probably a chipmunk, Harold," Mrs. Gable declared with unwavering certainty. "They love to burrow under tree stumps. My late husband, bless his soul, used to spend hours trying to trap the little critters. They're persistent, you know, just like your Sparky." Evelyn doubted it was a chipmunk. Sparky had never shown much interest in chasing small animals. He was a terrier, bred for hunting, but he was more interested in playing fetch and cuddling on the sofa than in pursuing prey. She also spoke to other neighbors, each offering their own theories. One suggested it was a ghost, the spirit of the old maple tree. Another thought it might be a magnetic anomaly, something that was affecting Sparky's internal compass. Another, a more practical soul, suggested it was simply a bad habit, a learned behavior that needed to be corrected with firm training. Evelyn listened politely to all the suggestions, but none of them felt right. None of them explained the intensity of Sparky's obsession, the unwavering focus, the almost desperate quality of his vigil. One evening, feeling particularly frustrated, Evelyn decided to seek advice from a more expert source. She logged onto her computer, a relic from the early days of the internet, and searched for dog behavior specialists. She found a website for a certified animal behaviorist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who offered online consultations. Evelyn filled out the online form, describing Sparky's behavior in detail. She received a reply the next day, a lengthy mail filled with technical jargon and a list of possible causes, ranging from obsessive-compulsive disorder to pica, a condition that causes animals to eat non-food items. Dr. Chen suggested a series of behavioral modification techniques, including positive reinforcement, distraction, and environmental enrichment. Evelyn tried to implement some of Dr. Chen's suggestions, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with a teaspoon. Sparky's obsession was too strong, too deeply ingrained. He was a dog with a mission, and nothing, it seemed, could deter him. Evelyn sat on her porch, watching Sparky digging furiously at the base of the stump, his little body a blur of white and brown. She felt a growing sense of unease, a creeping feeling that something was terribly wrong. She was a woman of logic, of reason, of practicality, but she was starting to feel like she was losing her grip on reality. She was starting to believe that there was something under that stump, something that only Sparky could sense, something that was driving him to the brink of exhaustion. And she was determined to find out what it was, even if it meant digging up the entire backyard. She was, after all, a librarian. And librarians, above all else, were seekers of knowledge. Evelyn's involvement with the Havenwood Historical Society was more than just a hobby. It was a passion. She'd always been fascinated by history, by the stories of the people who had come before her, who had shaped the world she now inhabited. She found solace in the continuity of history, in the knowledge that she was part of a larger narrative, a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives. The society met every Tuesday evening in the basement of the Havenwood Public Library, a cozy, slightly musty room filled with old books, maps, photographs, and artifacts. The meetings were usually informal, a gathering of like-minded individuals sharing their research, discussing local history, and planning upcoming events. This particular Tuesday, Evelyn found it difficult to concentrate. Sparky's relentless obsession with the tree stump was constantly on her mind, a nagging worry that overshadowed everything else. She sat quietly, listening to the other members discuss plans for the upcoming Founders' Day celebration, her thoughts drifting back to her backyard, to the stubborn terrier and the mysterious stump. During a break in the meeting, Evelyn found herself chatting with Gladys, her neighbor, who was also a member of the Historical Society. Gladys, a woman with a penchant for gossip and a surprisingly sharp memory for local lore, was regaling a small group with a story about a haunted house on the outskirts of town. "And they say," Gladys whispered conspiratorially, "that on moonless nights, you can still hear the cries of the poor woman who was murdered there, back in 1888. Evelyn, usually a polite listener, found her attention wandering. She was about to excuse herself when she overheard a snippet of conversation from another group nearby. The old Hathaway place, always wondered what happened to that silver. The name Hathaway caught her attention. It was a familiar name, one she'd encountered in her own research on the history of her property. She discreetly moved closer to the group, pretending to browse a display of antique farming tools. A young man, whom Evelyn recognized as Daniel, a history student interning at the society, was speaking animatedly. "I was reading through some old town records," he said, "and I came across this fascinating story about the Hathaway family. They were one of the founding families of Havenwood, very wealthy and influential. During the Revolutionary War, they were staunch patriots, actively supporting the Continental Army." "And the silver?" asked an older woman, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Well," Daniel continued, "according to the legend, the Hathaways own a magnificent set of silver serving pieces, a teapot, a creamer, a sugar bowl, all made by a renowned silversmith in Boston. When the British troops were advancing on Havenwood, the family feared the silver would be looted, so they hid it somewhere on their property." He paused for dramatic effect. "But they never recovered it. The family patriarch, Captain Elijah Hathaway, was killed in battle, and the secret of the silver's hiding place died with him." Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine. The Hathaway family, her property, the silver. Could it be? Could this old legend be connected to Sparky's strange behavior? She approached the group, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Excuse me," she said, her voice slightly trembling. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. My property. It used to be part of the Hathaway estate." Daniel turned to her, his eyes widening with interest. "Really, Mrs. Palmer? That's amazing. We were just discussing the legend of the lost Hathaway silver." Evelyn explained about Sparky's obsession with the tree stump, her initial skepticism, and her growing suspicion that there might be something more to the legend than just folklore. Daniel, his enthusiasm ignited, pulled out a worn, leather-bound book from a nearby shelf. "This is a history of Havenwood, published in 1895, he said, flipping through the fragile pages. "There's a whole chapter on the Hathaway family, and it mentions the legend of the silver. Let's see." He found the relevant passage and began to read aloud. "And it is said that Captain Hathaway, fearing for the safety of his family's most prized possessions, entrusted them to the earth, burying them in a secret location on his vast estate. A place known only to himself and his loyal hound, a dog named Courage." Evelyn gasped. "A dog named Courage?" It was too much of a coincidence. "There's more," Daniel said, his voice rising with excitement. "There's a map, a very rudimentary map, drawn by one of Captain Hathaway's descendants, based on family lore. It shows the general location of the Hathaway homestead, and there's a small X marked near what appears to be a large tree." He showed Evelyn the map. It was faded and difficult to decipher, but she could clearly make out the outline of her property, and the X was positioned remarkably close to where the old maple tree had stood. Evelyn felt a surge of adrenaline. She could no longer dismiss this as mere coincidence. The evidence was mounting, pointing towards a very real, very tangible possibility. "Daniel," she said, her voice firm, "I need your help. I think we need to dig." Even though Evelyn had already digged with Tom before, she did not know the local legend. Now, she needs help from a younger, stronger person who are more familiar with local history. The next morning, Evelyn and Daniel, armed with shovels, picks, and a metal detector borrowed from the Historical Society, stood before the stump. Sparky, sensing their purpose, danced around them, barking excitedly. "We need to be careful, Mrs. Palmer," Daniel cautioned. "If there's anything buried here, we don't want to damage it. We should proceed slowly, methodically, like a real archaeological dig." Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation. She was no longer skeptical. She was a believer. She believed in the legend, she believed in Sparky, and she believed that they were about to unearth a piece of history. They began to dig, carefully removing the loose soil and debris on the stump. Sparky, true to form, insisted on helping, digging furiously alongside them, sending dirt flying in all directions. They encountered the same obstacles as before: thick roots, stubborn rocks, compacted soil. But this time, they had a renewed sense of purpose, a shared belief that they were on the verge of a significant discovery. They found more false alarms, a rusty horseshoe, a piece of broken china, a child's toy soldier, each one sparking a brief moment of excitement, followed by disappointment. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Evelyn's back ached, Her hands were blistered, but she refused to stop. She was driven by a force she couldn't explain, a connection to the past, a desire to uncover the truth. And then it happened. Daniel, who was working on a section near the base of the stump, suddenly stopped digging. He let out a sharp cry. "Mrs. Palmer, I think I found something." Evelyn rushed to Daniel's side, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. She knelt down beside him, peering into the hole he had created. Daniel had cleared away a layer of soil and roots, revealing a section of carefully placed, flat stones. They were unlike the other rocks they had encountered. These were deliberately arranged, forming a small, square platform. "This is it, Mrs. Palmer," Daniel said, his voice trembling with excitement. "This is definitely something man-made. It's a marker, or a covering of some sort." Sparky, who had been watching their every move with intense focus, now began to whine, a high-pitched, keening sound that sent shivers down Evelyn's spine. He pawed at the stones, his tail wagging furiously. With renewed energy, they carefully removed the stones, one by one, revealing a layer of dark, damp earth beneath. A faint, musty odor rose from the hole, the smell of damp earth, and something else. Something metallic. Daniel reached into the hole, his fingers brushing against something hard and unyielding. He carefully pulled away more soil, revealing a piece of rotted wood, the remnants of a box or chest. "There's something here, Mrs. Palmer," he said, his voice hushed with awe. It's a wooden box, I think, but it's badly decayed." They worked together, carefully removing the remaining soil and the fragments of rotted wood. The wood crumbled in their hands, revealing a dark, metallic object beneath. It was a rectangular box, made of lead, its surface covered in a thick layer of corrosion. Evelyn gasped. The lead box. It was exactly as she'd imagined it, the kind of container that would have been used to protect valuable objects from the elements. They carefully lifted the lead box from the hole, its weight surprising them both. It was remarkably heavy, considering its size. They carried it to a clear patch of grass, placing it gently on the ground. Sparky, who had been watching their every move with intense focus, now approached the box cautiously. He sniffed at it, his tail wagging slowly, then he let out a soft whimper and sat down beside it, his gaze fixed on Evelyn. He seemed to be saying, "Finally, you found it." Daniel retrieved a small brush and a set of tools from his backpack, the kind used by archaeologists to clean delicate artifacts. He began to carefully brush away the loose dirt and corrosion from the surface of the box. As he worked, a faint inscription began to emerge on the lid, barely visible beneath the layers of grime. It was a single initial, elegantly engraved, Hathaway. Evelyn felt a surge of emotion, a wave of connection to the past, to the family who had lived on this land centuries before. She was holding a piece of history in her hands, a tangible link to the people who had shaped this town, this nation. The latch on the lead box was also corroded, but it was less damaged than the wooden box had been. Daniel carefully worked on it with a small pick and a pair of pliers, gently coaxing it open. With a soft click, the latch released. Daniel and Evelyn exchanged a look of shared anticipation, then, together, they slowly lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a silver serving set. A teapot, a creamer, and a sugar bowl, all crafted from gleaming silver, their surfaces intricately engraved with floral patterns and scrollwork. Even tarnished and covered in a thin layer of dust, the set was exquisite, a testament to the skill and artistry of the silversmith who had created it. It was a treasure, not just in terms of its monetary value, but in its historical significance, its beauty, its connection to a bygone era. The oilcloth protected the sliver very well. Evelyn reached out and gently touched the teapot, her fingers tracing the delicate curves of the handle. She felt a profound sense of awe, of reverence, of connection to the past. It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Daniel nodded, his eyes shining with excitement. "It's incredible, Mrs. Palmer. This is a major historical find. This could be one of the most significant discoveries in Havenwood's history." Sparky, as if sensing the importance of the moment, let out a soft bark, then nudged Evelyn's hand with his nose, as if to say, "I told you so." Evelyn smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. She looked at Sparky, at Daniel, at the silver gleaming in the sunlight. She felt a surge of gratitude, of wonder, of profound connection to the past, to the present, and to the unwavering loyalty of her four-legged companion. The mystery of the stump was solved, and this was far more extraordinary than she could ever have imagined. The discovery of the Hathaway silver sent ripples of excitement through Havenwood. News of the find spread quickly, fueled by local pride and a shared fascination with the town's rich history. Daniel, with Evelyn's permission, carefully cleaned and polished the silver serving set, revealing its full beauty and intricate detail. He researched the maker's mark, confirming that it was crafted by a prominent Boston silversmith in the mid-18th century, a contemporary of Paul Revere. He also delved deeper into the Hathaway family history, using the resources of the Historical Society and online genealogical databases. He discovered that Captain Elijah Hathaway had been a prominent figure in the Revolutionary War, a leader of the local militia, and a close associate of several founding fathers. But the most surprising discovery came when Daniel traced Evelyn's family tree. He found a connection, a direct lineage linking Evelyn to the Hathaways. Her great-great-great-grandmother, Sarah Hathaway, had been Elijah Hathaway's younger sister. Evelyn was astonished. She'd always known she had deep roots in New England, but she'd never known about this specific connection to Havenwood's founding family. It was as if a missing piece of her own personal history had suddenly fallen into place. "I can't believe it," she said to Daniel, her voice filled with wonder. "I'm a descendant of the Hathaways. All this time, I've been living on their land, walking in their footsteps, and I didn't even know it." Daniel smiled. "It's amazing, Mrs. Palmer. It's like the past is reaching out to you, through Sparky, through the silver." The explanation for Sparky's obsession became clear. He hadn't just been smelling the silver, he'd been sensing the presence of his, and Evelyn's, distant ancestors. It was a primal connection, a link across time, forged by blood and loyalty. Evelyn decided to donate the Hathaway silver to the Havenwood Historical Society. She felt it belonged to the town, to the community that had preserved its history for so long. She wanted it to be displayed for everyone to see, to learn from, to appreciate. The Historical Society was overjoyed. The silver became the centerpiece of their collection, attracting visitors from far and wide. It was featured in local newspapers and magazines, and even on a regional television news program. Evelyn, once a quiet, unassuming member of the society, became a local celebrity. She was interviewed by reporters, invited to give talks at schools and libraries, and hailed as a heroine for uncovering a lost piece of Havenwood's history. But for Evelyn, the most meaningful part of the experience was the personal connection it had forged, the sense of belonging, of rootedness, that it had given her. She felt closer to her ancestors, closer to her community, and closer to Sparky, her faithful companion, who had led her on this incredible journey. One crisp autumn afternoon, Evelyn and Sparky visited the Historical Society. They stood before the display case, admiring the gleaming silver, now beautifully restored and proudly displayed. Evelyn looked at Sparky, who was sitting calmly at her feet, his tail thumping gently against the floor. He no longer felt the need to dig, to search, to obsess. He was at peace. "You knew, didn't you, boy?" Evelyn whispered, stroking his soft fur. "You know all along." Sparky looked up at her, his brown eyes filled with that uncanny understanding that only dogs seem to possess. He licked her hand, a gesture of affection, of loyalty, of a shared secret. Evelyn smiled. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, of contentment, of belonging. She had uncovered a treasure, not just of silver, but of history, of family, of connection. And she had done it with the help of her faithful, four-legged friend, a dog who had proven that sometimes the greatest discoveries are found not by looking forward, but by digging into the past. The old maple tree was gone, but its legacy, and the legacy of the Hathaways, lived on, a testament to the enduring power of history, memory, and an unwavering bond between humans and their animal companions.